Hey there folks, welcome to Spectrum Pulse. We talk about music, movies, art, and culture. And today we're going to be talking about the newest album from the Dirty Projectors called Lamplit Prose. So stop me if you heard this one. A rock band breaks out in the mid-2000s, released a critically acclaimed record in the last few years of the decade, and then abruptly, everything seems to go awry, as what many critics perceive as the greatest draw of the group end up departing, leaving a solo frontman who decides to double down on his own ego and talents under the same band name for an increasingly pronounced pop pivot for some really questionable returns. I mean, the diehard fanbase is still there, but everyone else is kind of shying away. But enough about Panic at the Disco, we're here to review Dirty Projectors, right? And the parallels, they're not that exact, to be fair. Dirty Projectors did manage to get a second well-received record off of Bit Orca with Swing Low Magellan before a sizable chunk of the band quit, even if my opinions on the band and that album specifically remain pretty mixed to this day. I reviewed the record on my blog back in 2012 and I wasn't really a fan. But the more I thought about the parallels, the more they kind of fit in a twisted way. Hell, delve into the songwriting, it is not hard to see some similarities between David Longstreth and Brendon Urie in wildly overwritten, ego-driven posturing, especially in the face of Urie losing his entire band and Longstreth facing the departure of both Angel Daradorian and Amber Kaufman, whose unique harmonies would probably be highlighted as the most distinctive facet of the band to any casual fan. And then you have to look at them both doubling down on long-standing influences, with Brendon Urie focusing on musical theater and vintage pop, and David Longstreth stepping into a weird R&B, hip-hop, indie pop blend on the self-titled project last year that might have been passable, but felt way more awkward and uncomfortable than it should have, especially in some of the content. But hey, now Longstreth is looking in a more positive, upbeat direction with an album cover that seems to be openly aping Bit Orca. A loaded callback, if there is one. It's probably still their best album. So hopefully this would manage to connect more strongly for me, right? Honestly, I can't say that it does. And somehow the Brendon Urie comparison became even more prophetic because of Longstreth's shuddering steps towards increasingly sanitized blue-eyed soul. It's along a similar musical line to Urie's. But even that's not a complete description of the weird tones of Lamplit Prose. Part twee coffeehouse folk, part early 80s R&B, part increasingly unstable trip back to the well of Bit Orca, and part slice of vintage pop with fat horns and arranged elements with compositional nods to Bjork. And even being charitable, I cannot say it all really comes together. I'm sorry. Partially because the alchemy of a record like Bit Orca is fiendishly difficult to recreate, and the final results of Lamplit Prose can feel just as awkward as the self-titled release, just with more space and room to really faceplant in the street. In other words, yeah, not really all that good. And look, I will freely admit part of this, it's on me, because I was really trying to get past my issues with Longstreth's delivery with this album, which is half this weedy falsetto with little tightness, half squawking Bob Dylan impression that's only really tolerable when supplemented by a firmer groundswell of multi-tracking or guest stars. Although with the case of an artist like Sid on Right Now, she sounds like she'd rather be anywhere else than with Longstreth. Now, granted, part of that might have more to do with the underlying compositions themselves. We'll come back to this. And when you get something with a little bit more guitar-driven bounce that's openly cribbing from Michael Jackson like I Feel Energy, Amber Mark, she's a solid counterpart to Longstreth, even if I do wish she was given a little bit more to actually do on the song. Similar case for Empress of on Zombie Conqueror, or Dear Nora on the warping jazz touches of I Wanna Feel It All. But in the latter case, she's stuck with Longstreth trying to sell this restrained smoothness in his lower register, and I'm sorry, he's not convincing whatsoever. He doesn't have that smooth charisma there. Then there's the multi-part harmonies with Rostam and Robin Pecknold of Fleet Foxes on You're the One, where Longstreth has said he's going for more of a three tenors vibe, but what comes off to me is something closer to an early 90s acoustic hair metal ballad with less intensity. Yes, I'm gonna go there. But the more listens I gave Lamplit Prose, the more it felt like David Longstreth just does not seem to want to be a solo act in this lane, or at least wants somebody to sing harmony with them like the female backing vocals on That's a Lifestyle. And frankly, I don't blame him for that one bit, because when you take a look at the production in a lot of these compositions, it's kind of hard to ignore the sense that he's flailing. And look, the Dirty Projectors, they were never the most abrasive or aggressive band in indie rock, but Longstreth's flirtation with hip-hop grooves and R&B and percussion did not help him on the self-titled release, and I'm sorry, it's failing him again here, especially with no co-producer this time. time. None of the percussion has significant body or low-end presence. The clash with more organic, arranged tones is increasingly jarring with the brighter melodies and mixing. I don't care if it was intentional, it doesn't sound that good, and there's little texture or grit to speak of to add something to make it really mesh more cleanly together. And that's before I tell you that throughout significant chunks of this album, we're lucky to get a bass line at all. Now granted, every instrument in this mix has the too clean feel of getting scraped to its most tinny and blaring tones, and when you pair with compositions that already feel kind of picked over and over-arranged and stiff, it leaves the songs like Right Now feeling incredibly stiff and blocky, with some admittedly impressive acoustic picking just really sloppily layered for a binaural vibe opposite the beat, the flat synths, and the picking tapping sound, and that's before the trumpets are squealing in. And if you think those are awkward choices, it's followed up by the gargling guitar and the harmonica blasting through Break-Thru, or how Bluebird brings in recorders, muted keys, and a full horn section with a lot of prominent tuba to contrast with the percussion. It's almost trying to be way too eclectic and quirky. But you see, that's part of the point. So when the beat is thrown slapdash and louder than the electric guitar trying to build some sizzle and melody on I Found It in You, it's supposed to feel loose and free-spirited and joyously messy, and there is precedent for this sound to work, but I'm sorry, again, it's all too brittle and lacking foundational groove to get that feeling. Now, it's not saying that there aren't some songs with groove. Again, for as much as I Feel Energy's ripping off Michael Jackson, it kinda has to have the groove to work, but for as many horns are layered onto What Is the Time, it doesn't fit with the jittery drum machines that are too close to the front of the mix. And maybe it's not the best idea to play with tonal contrast between organic and electronic elements when you don't have texture to accentuate the similarities, or have any sort of stable foundation to build any of it. And then we get to the lyrics. And you know what, I'll give David Longstreth this. He's outright said there's no larger thematic conceit with the songs here. That's indeed, it's just more of a collection of songs. Fine by me, I'm happy he admitted it. But as somebody who has never found David Longstreth to be a great songwriter, less impressionistic as some people have described and more just reaching for poetry that starts really crumbling with any sort of deeper thought and not a lot of nuance, I'm sorry, I'm not all that impressed by what he's going for here. Break-Thru, good example of this. It's about wooing your disaffected hipster dream girl is keeping it 100 in the shade, which I've seen some people on Genius call out as a reference to the 1963 musical 110 in the Shade, but it's more likely a callback to current slang, let's be real here. But the line that throws me on the song is how she's hanging out all Julian Casablancas. And while there might have been some effortless cool in the Strokes' earlier years, I can see what he's going for. Any current interviews with Casablancas shows how bafflingly out of place the reference is right now within the context of the song. And when you combine it with the weird pile-up of classical references, it shows a songwriter who's scrabbling for descriptors that sound interesting on their face, but really don't coalesce together. Then there's That's a Lifestyle, a scattershot song that's trying to take aim at the older generation and the current political party in power in the States, even though Longstreth is in his mid to late 30s, and my impression is that the song is operating at least on some degree of sarcastic detachment, especially with the first pre-chorus damn near mimicking Halsey's New Americana from 2015, and the third verse playing for a very both sides, live and let live veneer that's not at all matched by his more earnest delivery. Bob Dylan could pull off sardonic contempt, Longstreth, you can't. Hell, honestly, the record gets a fair bit better when he just gets out of his own head and sticks with simpler lover dance songs like I Feel Energy or Bluebird, or even You're the One, although the poetry of songs like Zombie Conqueror with his tattered khakis, or how the universe became his mom and dad on I Found It in You, still shows an alarming penchant for some really awkwardly embarrassing lines. It's that similar juxtaposition of language aiming for both grand and contemporary, high and low art, and when it doesn't feel like an awkward overreach, it's just really slapdash. Again, it doesn't come together. And that's not counting points, it just feels oddly pompous, like how certain he is of that love to come on What Is the Time, delivered as if he buys every single word. He's very sincere in his delivery, and I'm not sure that helps him. So look folks, if you're enamored with David Longstreth's inexplicable cult of personality and you followed him this far, you'll likely find this tolerable, maybe a little bit cornier, a little bit more sloppy than usual, but for brighter material, you get what you expect. But for me, Look, going back a good 6 years now, I have said that the Dirty Projectors were a band where the overarranged artifice just cannot conceal a lack of deeper nuance, which is why I tend to be a little bit more tolerant of the straightforward pop cuts if they didn't feel so slapdash in their foundation and groove. And at the end of the day, as much as I like Bit Orca, this is a record that cannot possibly measure up despite some of the callbacks, which means it's getting a solid 5 out of 10 and only a recommendation for the die-hard fans. At this point, I can confidently say that Dirty Projectors in this incarnation are not for me, but even for the fans, I'm curious if the increasingly diminished returns, how long they'll wind up sticking around. Just saying. So yeah, thanks a lot for watching. If you'd like to like and subscribe, I'd be more than grateful. I know Dirty Projectors have quite the die-hard fan base. I remember encountering them 6 years ago on my blog, and that was something. But hey, I'm trying to be honest here. I did really love Bit Orca, and the fact that he keeps on trying to stumble in this direction, try to recreate some of that delicate alchemy, it's not working, and I don't think the callbacks here help him in that regard. But hey, if you want to buy the record, links down there below, and I got the poll up there for all you guys to tell me how wrong I am. Looking forward to it. Beyond that, anything else I might be able to do to improve my presentation, I'm all ears. If you guys want to get involved in my scheduling process, link to my Patreon is right over there, where 3 times a week you guys get to vote on my schedule, and once a week for the higher tier contributors, you guys get to add albums, movies, or even a top 10 list to that schedule. More details right over there. If you want to see my schedule, it's on my Instagram, link down there below. But till then, I'm Mark, you're watching Spectrum Pulse, and I'll see you next time.